Elias Calloway was 41 years old, and he had spent the last 11 years of his life building something that did not have his name on the door. That was a choice he had made deliberately, and for a long time it had served the purpose he intended. He drove a 6-year-old Ford F-150, the kind with the original floor mats still in it. He wore work boots on Fridays when he walked job sites, and a blazer the rest of the week that was 3 years old and fit correctly. He carried a thermos from home because the coffee in the corporate office tasted like it had been made by someone who did not drink coffee. He was the kind of man who showed up to meetings with the exact document the meeting required. Not a presentation, not a summary, the document, and who had never once, in 11 years of being underestimated by people who mistook his quietness for emptiness, felt the need to correct them in the moment. He had let the work correct them. Or he had waited. He was patient about it, the way he was patient about most things. On the morning of Tuesday, the 14th of October, he came to work the way he had come to work for 11 years. He parked in the same spot. He carried the same thermos. He walked past the same security desk and gave the same nod to the same guard, whose name was Theodore, and who had worked that desk for longer than Elias had worked in the building. By 10:35 that morning, he had been escorted out. The man who ordered it had no idea what he had just done. He found out before noon. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The corporate offices of Harland & Voss Construction occupied the 11th and 12th floors of a building downtown, and on most Tuesday mornings the place had a particular rhythm that Elias had grown to know the way you know the sounds of a house you've lived in long enough, where the HVAC clicked on, which elevator ran slow, how long it took the printer by the southwest window to warm up after the overnight. He had known those sounds for 11 years. He had been hired as a senior project consultant in the second year of Harland & Voss's existence, when the company was still small enough that everyone knew each other's names, and the founders, a man named Graham Harland and a woman named Patricia Voss, were still making decisions out of a shared office on the 7th floor of a smaller building across town. He had come in as a consultant, which was the category they had available, and he had done what he always did. He had looked at the problem in front of him, identified what it actually was beneath what it appeared to be, and built a solution that held. He had done that 11 times in 11 years. Each time, the project had been larger than the last. Each time, the category label on his employment file had stayed the same: Senior Project Consultant. The title had never mattered to him. The work had mattered to him. He had a particular method on job sites. He didn't talk much on the first visit. He walked the site, he asked the foreman 3 or 4 specific questions, and he looked at the load-bearing elements, the columns, the footings, the points where the structure connected to the ground, and he understood the whole shape of the project through those points. You could read a building from its foundations the way you could read a sentence from its verbs. He had built that method over 20 years of construction consulting before Harland & Voss. He had brought it here and applied it to every project they'd handed him, and 11 times the project had come in on time and under budget, and the client had renewed and sometimes expanded the relationship. He did not have an office. He had a workstation in the open plan section of the 12th floor, which he had chosen deliberately when he started, because he preferred to be near the people doing the actual work. He had not been assigned a workstation. He had chosen one. That distinction had mattered to no one. Until the morning Graham Harland retired and sold his interest in the firm to a man named Preston Vance. The overhead lights in the conference room on the 11th floor were the recessed kind, too bright in a way that was designed to feel efficient. And they had been that way since Preston Vance had ordered the renovation of the executive floor 4 months after his acquisition. Vance was 46, wide through the shoulders, and had the particular energy of a man who had spent a career acquiring things and believed that the ability to acquire was the same as the ability to understand. He had come in with 3 people: a chief of staff named Morgan Cullen, an operations director named Deb Ferris, and a communications manager whose name, Elias, had not been asked to learn because the communications manager was not involved in the 11 o'clock meeting. The 11 o'clock meeting had been on Elias's calendar for 4 days. The subject line said, Project Portfolio Review. He had prepared accordingly. He had a folder with the status updates for every active engagement, 5 projects, combined value of $73 million, along with the 3 proposals he had been developing for new work the firm had been approached about in September. He arrived at 10:57. The room was already occupied. That was the first signal. Vance was standing at the head of the table. Morgan Cullen was seated to his left. Deb Ferris was at the end, near the window, with a document in front of her that Elias recognized, not by its contents, which he hadn't seen, but by the size of the paper stack and the presence of 2 tabbed dividers, which was how HR formatted separation agreements. He noted it. He sat down. He set his folder on the table. "Thanks for coming in," Vance said. He had the voice of a man who conducted these meetings regularly and had learned to sound measured without having learned to sound sincere. "We're going to make this straightforward." Elias said nothing. He was looking at the folder in front of Deb Ferris. "We've completed our portfolio review," Vance continued, "and we've made some decisions about the consulting structure going forward. Your role, and several others in your category, are being eliminated." "This isn't a performance decision, isn't it?" Elias said. It was not a question. Vance treated it as one. "The firm's moving to a centralized project management model," Vance said. "We've brought in a third-party firm to handle the portfolio going forward. Your engagements will transfer to their team on November 1st. Elias looked at the window for a moment. Downtown was visible in the October morning light, flat and gray and very still. He thought about the 5 active projects: the school expansion in Rosemont, the medical center retrofit in Dunfield, the bridge access ramp that he'd been warning the structural team about for 6 weeks, the 2 commercial builds in the Eastern District. He thought about the 3 proposals sitting in his folder that he had not yet been invited to present. He thought about the project in Dunfield specifically, the retrofit, the foundation issue that he had flagged in September, in writing, in a memo addressed to Vance's office that had been acknowledged by Morgan Cullen with a 1-line reply that said it would be reviewed. He thought about what happened to buildings when the person who understood the foundation was removed from the project. He set his folder on the table. He did not set it down hard. He set it down with the same deliberate placement he gave everything: measured, controlled. Like a man putting a tool down that he intends to pick up again. "The Dunfield project has a foundation drainage issue I flagged in September," Elias said. "It's in the documentation. Whoever takes that file needs to read the September memo before they touch the design." Vance looked at Morgan Cullen briefly, the look of a man who considered a technical comment in a termination meeting to be a category error. "We'll make sure the files transfer correctly," Morgan said. "Not the files," Elias said. "The September memo specifically. Tell whoever takes it to read it first." Vance was already moving toward the close. "Deb has your separation paperwork. We've included a standard package, 2 weeks per year of service, which comes to 22 weeks. There's a non-disparagement clause, standard language. Take whatever time you need to review it." Elias looked at the paper stack. 22 weeks. He looked at Deb Ferris, who had the expression of a person who had been in enough of these meetings to have learned not to let her expression say much. He noticed one other thing: the young man standing near the door, the one who had not been introduced, who had the lanyard of a building security contractor, and who had clearly been positioned there to escort Elias out once the paperwork conversation concluded. He was trying to look like part of the furniture. He was not very good at it. He looked like what he was: a man in his mid-20s who had been asked to be present for a task he found mildly uncomfortable. Elias filed that away. Not because it mattered yet. Because it said something about how Vance had prepared for this meeting that he wanted to think about later. "I'll need to retrieve my personal items from my workstation," Elias said. "Absolutely," Vance said. "Derek will walk you up." That was the young man's name. Derek. Elias stood. He did not shake Vance's hand. He looked at Deb Ferris and said, quietly, "Make sure the Dunfield file goes to someone who actually reads it." Then he picked up his folder, the one he'd brought, with the proposals Vance would never see, and he walked out with Derek beside him, and he did not look back at the room. He got his thermos from the workstation. He got the 2 personal photographs he kept in the left drawer. He got the small folded card his daughter had made for him 2 birthdays ago that said "Dad" in crayon letters that were different sizes, which he kept because it was the best piece of communication he had ever received. He put all of it in the paper bag Derek had wordlessly produced, because apparently bags were part of the protocol. At the security desk, Theodore held the door. He said nothing, because there was nothing to say. But he held Elias's gaze for a moment in the way of a man who had watched this happen to better people than the one who'd ordered it and knew it. Elias walked to his truck. He sat in it for a moment. October light, flat and gray, the street quiet. He took out his phone. He made one call. Her name was Vivienne Osei. She was 67 years old, small and precise, with close-cropped silver hair and reading glasses she wore on a chain that had been a gift from her late husband. She was a retired corporate attorney, 31 years, 3 firms, the last 16 as a named partner at Osei and Whitmore, which she had founded and which remained, at the time of her retirement, the most respected construction law practice in the state. She was also Elias Calloway's aunt. And she had been for the past 19 months the managing trustee of a holding entity called Calloway Capital Group, the private investment vehicle through which Elias's family interests were organized, which held, among other things, a 34% equity stake in Harland & Voss Construction. He had never mentioned this at work, not because he was hiding it, because it had not been relevant. He had been hired on the basis of his work, and he had continued on the basis of his work. And the ownership stake, inherited from his late father, who had been one of Graham Harlan's original silent investors, had been a background fact, like the color of the building or the year it was incorporated. It had become relevant at 10:47 this morning. He called Vivienne at 10:52. She answered on the second ring. He said 4 sentences. She asked one question. Then she said, "Don't sign anything. I'll call you back in 30 minutes. She called back in 22. Preston Vance acquired Graham's interest through a leveraged buyout, she said. 31%. He did not know about your father's stake when he structured the deal, which means he did not know he was walking into a building where a minority shareholder with board observation rights had been working in the open plan section of the 12th floor for 11 years. A pause. He fired a shareholder, Elias. I know. He fired a shareholder without conducting a review of the cap table. I know. She let that sit for a moment. Then she said, "Tell me what you want." He had been thinking about it since he sat down in the truck. He had been thinking about the 5 projects, and the Dunfield Foundation memo, and the 3 proposals sitting in the folder on his passenger seat, and the 34 engineers and project managers and support staff currently employed on the 12th floor, people he had worked beside for years, people who knew the difference between a firm that understood construction and a firm that understood acquisition. He thought about Preston Vance's face during the termination meeting, the quality of a man who had not once, during the preparation of that meeting, considered that the person he was escorting out of the building might be worth more to it than the strategy he was replacing him with. He thought about the September memo and whether it was going to be read. "I want the Dunfield project pulled from the new firm's scope until the foundation issue is resolved," he said. "I want the September memo escalated to whoever's leading the structural review." Vivienne waited. "And I want a full board review of the third-party contract before November 1st, he said. "A proper one, with the documentation." "And the separation agreement?" "Don't sign it," he said. "Not yet." She said she'd begin the shareholder notification process that afternoon. He said to keep it quiet until the board review was scheduled. She said, "I know how to do this, Elias." He said, "I know you do." He hung up and looked at the street for a moment. Then he called Patricia Voss. Patricia had retired 18 months ago and was, by every indication, enjoying her retirement thoroughly. She had sent him a photograph in August of a garden she was cultivating in the south of France that had looked genuinely beautiful. She picked up on the third ring, sounding like someone who had been reading something pleasant. "Tell me this is a social call," she said. "It's not," he said. A pause. "Tell me what happened." He told her. She did not interrupt. When he finished, she said, "Preston didn't run the cap table." "No." Another pause. This one longer. "He called you a consultant." "He did." "For 11 years. Yes." Patricia Voss was quiet for a moment that had a particular quality to it. The quality of a woman who had spent 30 years in construction, who had built a firm from a 7th-floor shared office, who knew what it meant when the person who understood the foundations was removed from the project. "I still have my board seat," she said. "I know," Elias said. "I'll call you this evening," she said. "Elias, the Dunfield project." "I know," he said. "That's the one I'm worried about." "So am I," she said. And she hung up. He didn't move fast. That was what people who watched from the outside never understood about the 10 days that followed. Vivienne filed the shareholder disclosure notification the following morning, a formal document routed through the board's legal counsel that identified Callaway Capital Group's 34% stake, Elias's role as the beneficial holder, and the legal requirements that attached to a termination decision affecting a party with equity interest and board observation rights. The document was not aggressive. It was precise. It outlined what had happened, what the applicable governance provisions required, and what the remediation timeline was. Preston Vance received it at 8:14 a.m. on Wednesday. His response, which Morgan Cullen delivered to Vivienne's associate at 11:00 a.m., was that the termination stood, and that the firm's position was that the separation had been made on operational grounds unrelated to any equity position. That was his position. It was not a strong one. His attorney reviewed the cap table on Wednesday afternoon for what was, apparently, the first time. The conversation between that attorney and Vance's chief of staff, which one of Vivienne's contacts described afterward as significant, lasted 40 minutes. Patricia Voss called Elias on Wednesday evening. She had spoken with 2 of the remaining 3 board members, the ones who had not been part of the acquisition and who had, she said, opinions about how the last 4 months had been managed that they had been waiting for an appropriate moment to express. The board review he had requested was scheduled for the following Thursday. In the meantime, Vivienne's team filed a formal objection to the third-party consulting contract on the grounds that it had been executed without full board disclosure of the shareholder composition. This did not stop the contract. It created a legal hold on the transfer of the 5 active project files, including Dunfield, until the objection was resolved. The third-party firm's project lead called Elias directly on Friday. His name was Kevin. He was 33 years old, and he had the sound of a man who had been handed something large and complicated and was already feeling the weight of it. "I've been reading the September memo," Kevin said. "The foundation issue. Can you walk me through it?" "How long do you have?" Elias asked. "As long as you need," Kevin said. They spent 90 minutes on the phone. Elias walked him through the drainage assessment, the risk gradient, the 3 remediation options he had identified, the one he recommended, and why. Kevin asked good questions, the specific, technical kind that told you a person actually understood what they were looking at. By the end of the call, Kevin had a copy of Elias's original engineering notes, a revised scope recommendation, and an understanding that the November 1st timeline for the Dunfield phase was not going to hold if they did this correctly. "I'm going to tell Preston this," Kevin said. "Tell him in writing," Elias said. "And keep a copy." Kevin was quiet for a moment. "You've done this before." "I've worked in construction for a long time," Elias said. The board meeting was held on a Thursday, 9 days after the termination. The conference room was on the 14th floor, the same building, different level, and it had the quality of a space that had been built for decisions rather than announcements. Long table, neutral walls, the city visible through the east-facing windows in a way that reminded Elias of job sites at elevation, looking out over what you were building toward. He arrived 24 minutes early. He liked it that way. Vivienne arrived at 10 minutes to the hour, followed by her associate and a forensic governance specialist named Roland Tate, who had been retained to present the structural analysis of the acquisition and the termination in sequence. Patricia Voss arrived at 5 minutes to, nodded at Elias across the table, and sat down with the ease of someone returning to a room she had occupied for 30 years. Preston Vance came in at 2 minutes past, with his attorney, who was not Elliot Graves but had the same quality. A man who had been handed something and was now understanding its full dimensions for the first time. Morgan Cullen sat behind Vance, not at the table. The communications manager was not present. The board chair, a woman named Harriet Sung, who had held the role since the firm's founding, opened the meeting without preamble. "We have 2 items," she said. "First, the governance review of the October 14th personnel decision and its intersection with the firm's shareholder composition. Second, the status of the 5 active project files currently under legal hold. We'll take them in order." Roland Tate presented first. His voice was the kind that delivered information the way a structural engineer reads a report, in sequence, without editorializing, letting each element carry its own weight. The cap table, the acquisition terms, the governance provisions that attach to equity holders above 20%, the October 14th termination. The sequence, laid out plainly, was not ambiguous. Vance's attorney made 2 arguments. Roland responded to both of them with the relevant provisions and the date on which those provisions had been in effect. The second argument was shorter than the first. Elias did not say much. He had brought 1 document, his own project summary, the 5 active engagements with their current status and the specific risks that attach to each if the transition was mishandled. He did not present it as an argument. He presented it as information the board needed, which it was. When Patricia Voss spoke, She spoke the way she always had, the way of a person who had built something and knew what it was built from, and what happened to buildings when you removed the wrong element without understanding what it was holding. The October 14th decision was made without complete information, she said. That's the core of it. The question before this board is what we do about incomplete information when it produces a concrete operational risk. She looked at Harriet Sung. She looked at the other board members. She did not look at Preston Vance. I'd like to call for a remediation motion, she said. The motion passed 3-1. What the remediation required was specific. Elias's separation agreement was voided. His role was formally reclassified, Senior Project Director, with a scope that matched what he had actually been doing for 11 years. The third-party consulting contract was restructured so that Kevin's team handled the administrative portfolio management, while Elias retained primary technical authority on the active project files. The Dunfield timeline was extended by 6 weeks to allow the foundation remediation to proceed correctly. The one thing it did not do was remove Preston Vance. He remained the majority holder. He remained in the building. What he lost was operational control of the project portfolio, which transferred to a committee that included Patricia Voss, Harriet Sung, and one independent director, pending a 6-month governance review. At the conclusion of the meeting, Vance's attorney indicated his client needed a moment. The room cleared. Elias gathered his documents. Vance said, "I didn't know about the stake." Elias looked at him. He said it quietly, because there was no reason to say it any other way, and because it was the only thing that needed to be said. "I know you didn't. That's why you should have read the cap table before you scheduled the meeting." He picked up his folder. He shook Harriet Sung's hand, then Patricia's, then Rollins. He walked toward the door. He stopped once in the doorway, not to look at Vance, to look out the east window at the city, at the October afternoon that had gotten lighter since the morning, at the particular quality of a sky that had decided to be something other than gray. Then he walked out. It did not happen all at once. The Dunfield Foundation remediation was completed in late December. Kevin's team did the work correctly and on schedule. The medical center opened in the second week of January to a client who had been told more than once during the project that they had the right people on the structural end. They renewed the relationship in February for a second phase. The governance review concluded in the spring. Its findings were not dramatic, but they were specific. 3 decisions made in the 4 months following acquisition had been executed without adequate board disclosure. The board accepted the findings, implemented the recommended oversight protocols, and moved on. Preston Vance remained. He was a smarter man by April than he had been in October, not because he had been punished, because he had been forced to understand, in precise and documented terms, what he had not understood before. Some men learned that way. He appeared to be one of them. Elias went back to work the Wednesday after the board meeting. He parked in the same spot. He carried the same thermos. He walked past Theodore at the security desk and gave the same nod. Theodore said, "Good to have you back, Mr. Calloway." Elias said, "Good to be back, Theodore." He sat down at the workstation he had chosen 11 years ago because it was near the people doing the actual work, and he opened the Dunfield file, and he began to read. By the following April, he had 17 people reporting to him, a title that finally matched the scope of what he'd been doing, and 3 new project proposals in varying stages of development. He answered every call on the same day. He gave accurate timelines and hit them. He walked job sites on Fridays in the same work boots. His daughter's crayon card was back in the left drawer of the workstation, where it belonged. He looked at it sometimes in the afternoon when the project reviews got long, and he needed to remember what the work was actually for. On a Friday evening in late April, Elias stood at the window of the 12th floor after everyone had gone, looking out at the city settling into its evening. The office was quiet in the particular way offices got quiet on Friday nights. Not empty exactly, just returned to itself. He had the Dunfield completion report in one hand and his thermos in the other, and the knowledge, quiet and specific, that the building they had built was going to hold. He thought about his father, about the silent investor who had believed in Graham Harland before Graham Harland was a name anyone knew, who had put his trust into something because he understood the foundations of it and knew what it would become. He thought about what it meant to build something you were willing to put your name behind, even if your name wasn't on the door. He finished his coffee. He set the completion report on his desk. He turned off the lamp, put on his jacket, and took the elevator down to the lobby, where Theodore was finishing his shift and raised a hand in the particular farewell of a man who had held the door long enough to know who was worth holding it for. Elias walked to his truck. He put the thermos on the seat. He drove home. He had a job site in the morning. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.